Hi all, dear friends. Welcome to this new episode of my podcast, A Digital Tomorrow. Today I'm joined by Marc Lepage, Technology Innovation Specialist at the Asian Development Bank, ADB. Welcome, Marc, to my show.
Thanks, Oriol, for the kind invitation, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to listeners.
Well, it is my pleasure to host you today. I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting discussion. We're going to talk about very interesting topics about the ADB, Southeast Asia. So please stay tuned for the remaining part of this episode. Before digging deeper though into these areas that I just mentioned, I would like to start from the very beginning. I would like to start first of all by asking you if you could please provide my listeners with a short explanation of what the Asian Development Bank is. Like, for example, when was it created, what are its main goals and purposes, etc.
Thanks, Oriol. So ADB was conceived in the early 60s as a financial institution that would be Asian in character and foster economic growth and cooperation in one of the poorest regions in the world. So we are one of the multilateral development banks around the world. Our Asian focus make us, of course, geographically unique, but also in nature. We have 67 member countries, some regional and some non-regional. And we provide development assistance mostly in the forms of lending to countries in the region, as well as grants, mostly to support infrastructure. So, listeners should think about airport and roads and electricity infrastructure, etc. And the technical assistance that comes with these lendings is really towards supporting social economic development, especially for the poor of the region. So this is an institution that's been around for many years, that has seen a lot of progress in the region, but there's still a lot to do. As of today, 2022, our sort of overall strategy is dictated by what we call Strategy 2030, which is largely, if not entirely, aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but with an Asian perspective to it. Over to you.
Well, before you joined the ADB, you already had a very extensive and relevant experience in the area of technology for development in Africa, Middle East, and Asia. Could you please summarize your personal journey with my listeners?
Sure, thanks. So I've started work in technology for development pretty much coming out of my studies. I've had the opportunity to work with the UN Development Program in Asia, starting in the late 90s, when some countries in Asia Pacific were still not connected to the internet. There was a lot of capacity gap. There were issues around internet governance. Some countries were not in control of their country domain code. Think of .uk, .ie, etc. On the internet, and other issues. So the first few years I was living in Southeast Asia, doing a lot of very technical work connecting countries in the region to the internet, etc. And then in early 2002, I was sent to Afghanistan for 3 days, and those 3 days turned into 2 years over time, where I was part of the first group of civilians that returned to Afghanistan to help the country. On my side, obviously on the technology, providing internet access to key ministries, to citizens via post offices, doing a lot of capacity building, etc. I then sort of moved further west and was working out of Cairo for a regional UNDP program covering the Middle East, and then eventually spent a little bit over 10 years in Africa with different roles, mostly with UNDP, And my last role out of the UNDP Regional Center for Africa in Addis Abeba was to lead the Africa window of the UNDP Innovation Fund, which was a fund that was geared for UNDP country offices in Africa to try things out. So innovation in its broader sense, so not only technology, but also other aspects of innovation. And this was a really interesting role. I was given the opportunity to come back to Asia and to have a little bit more technology focused role in 2019. So this is when I joined the Asian Development Bank. And so started my career in Asia and went further west and came back to Asia full circle. And it's for me, it's very interesting to come back to the region more than 20 years after I started. Well, a lot of things have changed. Some elements have also remained, including some deep pockets of poverty and lack of access to inclusive finance, etc. So that's my own personal journey. Over.
Well, thank you for sharing. I think it's a very eventful journey which involves many countries, as you said. It's very interesting to hear from you regarding your journey. And now I would like to talk a bit about the Asian Development Bank's digital transformation agenda. Well, because at the end of the day, as you know, my podcast is called Digital Tomorrow, and you are a technology specialist, so it makes perfect sense to discuss this now. For example, I wanted to ask you, could you please summarize what is the ADB's digital transformation agenda? And if you could please focus as well on this agenda that you mentioned before, the Digital Agenda 2030, which, as far as I know, provides this vision and roadmap for ADB's digital transformation. So if you could please as well, summarize like the main goals of that Digital Agenda 2030.
Thanks, Oriol. So the key sort of strategic document for ADB is our strategy 2030, like I've mentioned earlier. And in the vision of the leaders of the organization, whether IT or non-IT leaders, it was very clear that IT strategy had to be aligned with the broader goal of the organization, which many of your listeners would find natural, but that's not always the case. There's sometimes a disjunction between the IT strategy and the organizational strategy, but this wasn't the case for ADB. And so this is how the Digital Agenda 2030 was created. And this is really a document that provides the vision and a roadmap for ADB's digital transformation. So, of course, through the use of secure, modern information and technology systems, as well as digital processes to enhance the effectiveness, efficiency, and resilience of the organization. There had been previous IT reforms at ADB, and it had showed the importance of strong governance, commitment from management, etc. All things that, again, listeners working on digital transformation would be familiar with. How it translated in terms of ADB specifically, the digital agenda has 6 key pillars. The first one is a program to empower what we call our operation, which is what ADB does, the lending and grants to countries in the region. So to empower these operations to be a more integrated, flexible, efficient and transparent with accountability. So a big change in terms of IT supporting operation. The second one is around our own financial services, so that technology provides more flexible and innovative financial products and services. This has been absolutely key. The third pillar is around very internal administrative and corporate services to really renovate those corporate systems. Those with maybe interacted with ADB, whether trying to apply to a position or be a consultant, may seem that those systems are a little bit outdated, and it was grand time to renovate those corporate systems. The fourth pillar of the digital agenda is around digital workplace and connected data, and it's really to create more open collaborative platform for seamless client, partner, and staff engagement and connected data. Just to illustrate, before the digital agenda, ADB was largely relying on fairly outdated technology productivity software. Currently, we are fully cloud enabled. And in fact, the current crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, has really showed the strategic good decision made under this digital agenda. Because if it wasn't for this cloud system, we would be struggling in terms of operating remotely. Now, to go back to the digital agenda, the fifth pillar is around digital backbone, and it's really to foster IT service excellence through optimal use of secure and modern technology, which wasn't the case in terms of overall infrastructure at ADB. And finally, the sixth pillar of the digital agenda is what I personally work on, and we'll surely talk a little bit more about this. It's called the Digital Innovation Sandbox, and this is really to prepare ADB for the future by experimenting with new technology in a safe environment. So those are the different components of the ADB digital agenda, and it's been implemented since early 2019, and we're currently looking at the next phase that will start in 2024, and that will take us to 2030. Back to you, Oriol.
Thank you for sharing this. Actually, there are like two of these pillars in which I would like to dig a bit deeper. The first one is the one on financial services. The idea, as you mentioned, is to provide those innovative financial products and services, flexible products. So could you please elaborate on what products are we specifically talking about, like any examples?
Sure. So some of these products that are covered under this digital agenda are very internal to ADB, and they relate directly to the work we're doing. One of the key sort of change and element in ADB's strategy 2030 is enhancing the support to private sector in the region. Historically and traditionally, ADB's support was almost entirely what we call sovereign support, so to governments in the region. But we recognize that private sector has an incredible and key role in development of Asia. And so our private sector operation have a very significant increase in terms of both quality and quantity under strategy 2030. And so we need to have IT systems that are aligned with this. Previously, in a nutshell, we weren't doing much with private sector, and the tools that we had at our disposal were not, really fitted for private sector support. And so that's a pretty big element of this digital agenda. One of the element under our private sector operation support is what we call ADB Ventures, for example. And ADB Ventures is basically ADB's venture capitalist group, which has a very ambitious agenda in terms of investing in up-and-coming startups that are working on impact-related theme, whether it's transport, access to energy, etc. And many of those startups have a digital angle. So there's already been a couple of investments that have been made by ADB Ventures into startup, whether it's a satellite-based company, a drone, or the use of innovative digital technology for energy. So ADB Ventures is an important element to this, and we needed the IT system to support this, and so this is what this element of the digital agenda is all about.
And regarding the other pillar, the Digital Innovation Sandbox 1, I wanted to ask you, what technologies will be prioritized? For example, will it be artificial intelligence and machine learning, blockchain, and why?
So yes, from the get-go, the Digital Sandbox, so one of the key pillars of the digital agenda, has had a focus on a number of technology. So you've mentioned some of them. Blockchain or DLT being one, artificial intelligence with a specific focus on machine learning is the second one. We also look at mixed reality, whether it's augmented or virtual reality. Under the Sandbox program, we also do a little bit of robotics in different shapes and forms. We have a few of those humanoids robots at ADB, and we've tested in various contexts. Anything from welcoming visitors to our events or being used as knowledge services, but also on the sort of pure software robotics with apologies to non-technology savvy listeners, but what is called RPA, robotic process automation, which is not entirely new, but for an organization that has quite a lot of legacy system like ADB is very important. Think of RPA as macro on steroids, so very smart macros that can link different systems. Our portfolio of initiatives as of now is probably about 1/3 DLT blockchain, 1/3 AI, and 1/3 the rest of this. We, of course, and this is the whole point of the Sandbox, is try to get a sense of what's coming next, and not as in the next software release, but then the next software generation. So recently, we've obviously paid a lot of attention to two things that are DLT related or NFT. I'm thinking about NFT, non-fungible tokens. We're looking at the opportunity to pilot a couple of initiatives to see if this technology is relevant in the context of ADB. And the other one that has emerged recently is around metaverse, and how, again, this is a concept that can be useful in our own context. We always sort of scout and are on the pay attention and research technology that could become interesting for ADB, and it's developing member countries, but those are the key ones.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing, and it's very interesting indeed to hear that you are working as well, or at least exploring the ideas of the metaverse and NFTs. This shows that you are at the forefront of anything tech related. And well, now that we covered already the ADB's digital transformation agenda, I wanted to talk a bit about social development and reducing poverty in Asia and the Pacific. As you know, I co-lead the Financial Inclusion and CBDC Working Group at the Global Impact FinTech Forum, GIFT. And well, this is why I'm very interested now in the idea of trying to promote financial inclusion, especially in those areas where the amount of unbanked people is much higher. In that sense, I wanted to ask you, how does the ADB play such a definite and important role in contributing to the idea of promoting financial inclusion?
Thanks, Noel. And let me backtrack a little bit also on the sort of history of the Sandbox program. When the Sandbox program was launched as part of the digital agenda, our mandate was largely internal. The sort of typical engagement that I would have was with ADB colleagues working on HR, risk management, budget, auditing, etc., trade finance, etc. So largely internal. And we did these proof of concept with those various ADB colleagues, again, on the use of blockchain, AI, etc. And as we were communicating internally about these initiatives, colleagues working with governments in the region reached out to us and said, look, what you're doing for audit, risk management, etc., on AI, blockchain, etc., can you also do this for governments in the region? And so over time, our portfolio of initiative broadened from an initial group of projects that were almost entirely internally focused to something that's much more externally focused. And at this point, it's probably 50-50 between internal and external. And so, of course, the use of technology for financial inclusion is a big part of what we're doing. And we're doing this with our financial sector group colleagues. The ADB financial sector group used to be headed by Lotte, who's now the head of our Sydney office, who's part of this GIFT group. And so she's been an incredible champion on the use of technology for financial inclusion. And we've come in support of the financial sector group work in a couple of different occasions. Let me just mention a few. One is around the need for KYC and linked to that digital ID in a context where connectivity is not guaranteed. So we looked at developing an app that would work both online and offline for digital ID. This was co-designed by startups in the Philippines and in Finland. So basically combining the best of both worlds. It's a startup that had experience with working in a developing countries context, and a startup that used state-of-the-art technology. And this was piloted in Papua New Guinea, an environment where connectivity is not at all guaranteed, where there's no ID system, and where the ability for citizens to prove who they claim they are is difficult, basically, and where technology can play a role so that they can have access to different services, whether it's micro lending, social services, health, education, or farming, to have access to insurance, for example. So this is one. We've also worked with the financial sector group in the context of increasing access to lending to SME. Again, one area where technology can play a key role, and this is something we've also piloted. In some cases, we use a crowdsourcing approach to find solution, and it's been a very useful approach to get solutions from the crowd, from people, organization we may not know, but that have a real value added in that space. So all that to say that FinTech is a key element of what we do at ADB, and we think that it can really move the needle to lift a part of Asia out of poverty.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like this statement very much, to hear that FinTech is a key element of what you do at ADB. It's always reassuring to hear that FinTech is much more, than just this area that you read about all the time on the media and about which there seems to be a hype. It's actually great to see that there can be a difference. And that's actually part of why I'm trying to do at the Global Impact FinTech Forum as well, to find ways or to prove that FinTech is much more than just this intersection between finance and technology. It's much more than just making transactions maybe like faster or more efficient. No, it's much more than that, because there is this, for example, financial inclusion angle. I mean, you can use FinTech to reduce poverty and to, in general, to produce social change, and therefore FinTech has this added value, which is to me much bigger than what most people can initially think of, when like reading the news on the media, etc.
And this is such an important space, because there's been a number of key private sector players, especially in Asia, working on making payment easier for citizens and small business. And at a time where government really want to get more involved in this space, and the whole central bank digital currency thematic is really thriving in Asia and beyond. So there is that sort of tension between the two, the private sector and the government controlled electronic payment system. And we at ADB try to find to be a neutral advisor and player in that space, and for governments in the region. Obviously, those are different in nature, but they have they each have a niche to fit, and our sort of underpinning thinking and philosophy is how can these technology serve the unprivileged and those who are currently sort of left behind, and how can those different parts, private sector and public, contribute to lifting them out of poverty.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. You mentioned now something very interesting, which is the area of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. And I think it's globally interesting, but especially even much more in Asia, because Asia seems to be like the area, the part of the world continent where CBDCs are attracting by far much more interest. It's not just China with the digital yuan, it's like many more projects, CBDC projects, or at least blockchain-based projects, like, for example, as you know, Cambodia with its project Bakong, which this is not a CBDC project per se, but it's a quasi CBDC project, as we could call it, based on blockchain, which aims as well to try to lift people from poverty and promote financial inclusion, among other objectives. So I would say that it's pretty much what you said. No, I don't think there is one right approach to it. I'm not saying that CBDCs are going to be the only way to promote financial inclusion, because the private sector as well may have a role to play. For example, when it comes to, let's say, stable coins, I think that, at least to me, and I may be wrong, as long as a product promotes financial inclusion, we need to try to embrace that product, or at least study it and get to learn more about it. No, it's not that CBDCs are going to be like the only tool. Stable coins can play a role, even privately issued cryptocurrencies in certain scenarios. So we need to keep an open eye, I think, and an open mind.
Look, absolutely. I think it's too early to make any firm prediction, and in that sense, this is what the sandbox is all about. It's an opportunity, so initially for ADB, but now for developing member countries, to experiment and gain first-hand experience with these technologies. So specifically in the context of CBDC, a number of central banks in the region have reached out to ADB to basically get support to test these technology. Our perspective, our position is like, we're not advocating for CBDC. We're not against. We're saying it's worth exploring, because as things are unfolding and they're moving pretty quickly, it's good to get that firsthand experience, to go from, okay, let me read about CBDC to let me experiment with CBDC. I fully agree with what you were saying. There will be probably a space for those different technology, whether CBDC, stable coins, in some very specific context, crypto maybe, but for sure it's something that is worth exploring. In the region, I think the interesting part also is the inter-central bank exchange and the different pilots that are being done, whether it's from MAS, Hong Kong, some of the key central banks in the region, within the region and beyond, to make exchanges more seamless and to turn money into smarter money, in support of those who need it the most.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Interoperability will indeed be a key area when it comes to CBDCs. And actually, before wrapping up our discussion, I wanted to talk a bit more about new technologies and financial inclusion. And well, we mentioned already some part of it when we were talking now about CBDCs, but broadly speaking, I wanted to ask you, what role do you think that blockchain can play in promoting financial inclusion? On the same idea about artificial intelligence, what role do you think AI can have? Like, is there like any government or initiative that you know and that you find very interesting in this area when it comes to applying either blockchain or AI to promoting financial inclusion?
So in terms of blockchain, I think there's been a couple of experiments, but admittedly, in my view, I still haven't seen anything that I thought was a major game changer. This might change again. It's still very open and etc. But I think blockchain has a little bit more of an edge in other areas. One of those areas where we work is around, for example, carbon trading. I mean, obviously today, carbon markets are really not fluid, and it's very difficult to get involved in those. And this is one piece of technology, blockchain, that can really move the needle in terms of the world's commitment to the COP21 Paris Agreement to make carbon market more efficient. Another one that I can think of is around trade finance. We worked also in that context, the use of blockchain for trade finance. Trade finance today also is not very fluid in all this, and it's a technology that can help. The other one is around education credential, for example. That's also a space where blockchain can play a key role, and we've done a couple of proof of concept around this. In financial inclusion, there's some really interesting stuff going, but it's sort of 2 layers down. It's around product and services that are not directly facing citizens or government officials, but that are enablers of underlying infrastructure. And there's some interesting work around this. Some of that is around CBDC, for example. In terms of artificial intelligence, around there's, I think, some really interesting stuff going on financial inclusion and access to market, platforms that are using AI for increasing the matchmaking, for example, or the faster loan and lending analysis, for example, is also something that I found really interesting. Finding a way to give access to financial services and using AI to make sure that regular practices of anti-money laundering, anti-fraud, ensuring no financing to terrorism, etc., are followed. The general AML using AI is also an interesting space. Mm-hmm. And I think there the private sector, of course, plays a key role in that. Thanks.
No, thank you very much, Marc, for sharing this. And well, actually, we are running out of time, so we will need to wrap up this very interesting discussion. It's been a pleasure to hear from you, to discuss with you all those very interesting topics about the ADB's digital transformation agenda, promoting financial inclusion, technology for financial inclusion as well, as we just discussed. I think both I and my listeners will learn a lot from you by listening and re-listening to this episode. So for that and for your time, I would like to thank you, Marc.
Thanks a lot, Oriol, for the opportunity, and thank you, listeners who've stayed all along. Please send comments, questions, and very happy to open that discussion. We're really trying things out here. We're not saying we've got the silver bullet. A lot of these things are developing stories. But no, thanks again, Oriol, for the opportunity, and looking forward to hearing this and the next episodes online.
Well, thank you, Marc, and to all my listeners, thank you very much for listening to this episode, and please stay tuned for the next ones. See you.
Bye for now.